One. I have a sleep paralysis disorder. REM sleep induces a sort of paralysis which keeps you from sleepwalking. My problem is that I quite often begin to awaken while my mind is still asleep and my body is still paralyzed. So I will begin feeling outside stimuli. Sometimes I can manage to open my eyes a little or shout myself awake. This has been a regular thing for me for years, and it still terrifies me. Monsters from my dreams will be in the room with me when I wake up. I'll often have incredibly scary dreams of not being able to move or run from danger. I believe it is a PTSD symptom from my past abuse. The first time it happened was after I left my abusive family, and a freaky flesh monster blob version of my father followed me to the house where I was staying. I managed to shout myself awake, while my friend thought there were robbers and came out with a pistol. Even though I know that I am safe and it's just a dream, I cannot bring myself to relax through it and wake up normally. I'll shout, "Please wake me up," to my husband in bed, but sometimes I get stranded between waking and sleeping, aware of myself in my bed but still embedded in a nightmare. Awful stuff. Two. When I was 7 years old, I woke up from a nightmare. I had them frequently at that age, and I was very easily frightened. The nightmare didn't shut off after I woke up, though. The floor was covered with crab lobster monsters that tried to attack my feet, and I had a vague sense that something else was in the house. I carefully made my way down the hall to get to my parents' bedroom. Just in front of their door was the landing of the staircase. I was almost there when I saw a flayed corpse shuffling up the stairs, looking straight at me. I turned around and sprinted back to my room, hiding under the covers until I fell back to sleep. Even the next day, I knew it had all been in my head, but it was one of the scariest experiences of my life. Three. I had this dream when I was a child at 11 years old, and it has stuck with me ever since. During the dream, I was being chased by a big, burly, clean-shaven, but menacing man. He was chasing me through a city, one that I had never been to before, and he was firing a gun at me. As I ran away, his stray bullets were hitting the sides of buildings, telephone poles, and other random things, but occasionally they were hitting people. Eventually, he caught up to me and fired his gun and shot me. I died, but instead of passing away, I was reborn in a different city. I was still myself, still being chased by the man, still fleeing in terror. Like before, he eventually caught up to me and killed me, and again, I reincarnated to a new place. I eventually came to the conclusion that he would eventually kill me regardless of how much I tried to run away. I realized that other people were getting hurt and sometimes killed by his stray bullets, and that it was for the best that I accept my fate and save the lives of others. So I stopped running, and he killed me. But instead of reincarnating, my whole world became black. His face appeared, smirking, looking me dead in the eyes, and said,
"I'll see you in your dreams."
I woke up. It still gives me chills to this day. I never saw him again in my dreams, but it is so vivid in my memory, 15 years later, that there are so many things to think about. Was it a lesson in empathy? Accepting death? I don't know. I guess I'll never know. Four. When I was a little girl, 6 to 8 years old, I had the same dream for about 2 years. In the dream, everything had this strange, slow way of being, and everything had muted colors. Nothing was bright. It would begin with my grandmother waiting in her driveway inside of her car, facing forward and not looking at me. I would get in the back seat, and she would do this strange, slow driving down the main street of her town. She lives in a very small, very old town in the south, and the main street is full of antebellum mansions, but the town is falling apart. She drives me down this street, and everyone is outside on their front lawns doing yard work as we drive by. We end up parking in front of the biggest mansion, and my grandmother lets me out without saying a word. I walk up to the front door, waltz right in, and there is a family of 4 watching TV. However, the screen is just that creepy static gray. My mom and dad are sitting at the opposite ends of a couch, looking like intimacy was as foreign to them as anything imaginable, and the 2 kids are sitting crisscross with their chins resting on their fists and their arms resting on their knees. They all turn up to look at me, and the mom calmly says, "She's upstairs." I continue to walk all the way up the stairs until I get to the attic. The attic has sloped ceilings with walls, long pine floorboards, super wide old pieces of wood, and 2 windows directly across from each other. One was the east and one was to the west. The 2 windows create these perfect beams of light, and where they meet centers on a little girl with long hair in a white dress, sitting in a high-backed old wooden chair holding a doll. I sit down in a chair directly across from her, and I proceed to tell her all about my day. She hears about all the mundane things that happen in my 6 to 8-year-old life, from telling her about my friends to my teachers to games with my brother, etc. She never looks up at me, but smiles when things are funny and just calmly strokes the hair of her doll. When I'm done telling her about my day, I tell her I'm going to see her later, and I leave. I walk down the stairs to the bottom floor, where her family, I'm assuming it's her family, doesn't even look up at me, and I get back to the car with my grandmother, and then I wake up. I had this exact dream every single night, aside from my stories changing day to day that I tell the little girl, for quite a long time, until one day things changed. The dreams begin as usual, getting into the car with my seemingly comatose grandmother, and we start driving down the main street in her town. This time, all of the people doing yard work stop what they are doing and look at me as I drive by. People mid-raking stand up, rest against their rake, and just stare at me. People tending to their gardens put down their tools and turn to look at me. It really weirded me out, so when we finally get to the large house where the little girl lived, I bolted in the front door, and I see that things have changed. The family is staring at a blank spot on the wall where the TV used to be. The mom and dad are sitting on crates, and when I walk in, they all turn to look at me, and the mom says, "She's gone." I ran as fast as I could all the way up to the third-floor attic. When I walk in, I see that the chair I normally sit in is gone, and the chair the little girl sits in is empty, save for her old doll. I turned around and she was nowhere in the empty attic. I remember feeling panicked and scared and dejected as I slowly walked back down the stairs to her family, staring at the empty wall, their house falling down around them, something I failed to notice until this point. I go back into the car with my grandmother, woke up, and I never had that dream again. 5. My family used to have a cabin at a large lake development. Over the summer, when the pool and beach area were crowded, people would drive to the spillway at the dam to swim because it was relatively shallow and warm. I hated going to the spillway because we lived on the side of the lake where you had to drive down a narrow, steep gravel road to get to the dam, which was also narrow to pass on. The back side of the dam was very steep as they quarried out the bottom and sides of the ravine to fill for the dam. I would close my eyes and hold my breath any time we drove there and left permanent impressions in the door handle from squeezing so tightly. One night, I had a dream that my family decided to spend a weekend out there and have a barbecue at our cabin. During that dream, my parents decided to take us to the spillway to swim. On the way across the dam, there was a rusty maroon Ford Ranger coming across the dam at us. It still sticks out in my mind over 20 years later. He was speeding across, leaving a huge dust cloud, and lost control right in front of us, hitting us and sending us down the back of the dam. I remember the car flipping and riling down the hill, getting crushed and gravel flying through the windows. Finally, the car stopped, and I remember seeing my sister bloodied and unconscious. At this point, I was so scared, I finally woke up. It felt so real, and is probably the scariest dream of my life to this date. Now to the point. That next morning, my parents decided to go to the cabin. No big deal. We went there quite a bit over the summers. Had to be a coincidence. We go to the cabin and barbecue. My dad had a few to drink and decided that we should go swimming. Everyone decided that the spillway sounded the most fun that day, and I started getting a little nervous with that dream so fresh in my mind. I suggested the pool or the beach to try and sway their minds. It didn't work. It almost seemed like they knew about my dream and wanted to make sure it came true. So we start cleaning up and loading the vehicle, and my mom asked me to put the roaster in the vehicle to take home. I was so worried about that rusty maroon Ford Ranger by this point that I knew I had to do something. So I put the roaster in the cabin and would mention on the way that I forgot it and try to say that we should just forget swimming and go home because I wasn't feeling well. We leave, and about halfway to the dam, I mentioned that I forgot the roaster. My mom decides to turn around to go and get it. Back at the cabin, I mentioned that I'm not feeling well. The response that I got was, "Well, you can just sit in the shade and take it easy." Heading back to the dam, I was so worked up that we were all going to die, that I was shaking so badly my mom asked if I was cold or had a fever. As we rounded the bend to head down the narrow road of impending death, the rusty maroon Ford Ranger flew past us, almost hitting us. I went into shock. I didn't even know what to do or say, but realized that by turning around for that roaster must have been just enough time to let that truck cross the dam. I can still remember the way the guy looked, and I can still see the green leaves being rustled from the speed of his truck, and I can still taste the dust that was in the air as we drove across the dam. This is the first time I've ever mentioned this, as I thought everyone would consider me crazy for such a thing. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the show. If you have a story to share, send us an email, like us on Facebook, share, like, and subscribe.